friendly, as his nature had not developed in this valley of the shadow to determine his feelin's towards his father when he died, being carried off by a chill, caused by the change from hot to cold, the weather being that contrary." They had arrived in Brian's sitting room by this time, and Madge sank into a chair, while Calton, anxious to begin the search, hinted to Mrs. Sampson that she could go. "I'm departin', sir," piped the Cricket, with a sad shake of her head, as she opened the door, "knowin' as I do, as he's innocent as an unborn babe, and to think of me havin' told that horrid person who had no regard for the truth of all about him, is now in a cold cell, not as what the weather ain't warm, and he won't want a fire as long as they allows him blankets." "What did you tell them?" asked Calton sharply. "Ah! you may well say that," lamented Mrs. Sampson, rolling her dingy handkerchief into a ball, and dabbing at her red-rimmed eyes, which presented quite a bacchanalian appearance, due, be it said in justice, to grief, not to liquor. "Havin' been beguiled by that serpent in light clothes, as wanted to know if he always came home before 12, which I said as he was in the habit of doin', though, to be sure, he did sometimes use his latch-key." "The night of the murder, for instance." "Oh, don't say that, sir," said Mrs. Sampson, with a terrified crackle. "Me bein' weak and ailin', though comin' of a strong family, as always lived to a good age, through bein' in the habit of wearin' flannels, which my mother's father thought better nor a spilin' the inside with chemistry." "Clever man, that detective," murmured Calton to himself. "He got out of her by strategy what he never would have done by force. It's a strong piece of evidence against Fitzgerald, but it does not matter much if he can prove an alibi. You're likely to be called as a witness for the prosecution," he said aloud. "Me, sir!" squeaked Mrs. Sampson, trembling violently, and thereby producing a subdued rustle, as of wind in the trees. "As I've never been in the court, 'cept the time as father tooked me for a treat, to 'ear a murder, which there's no denyin' is as good as a play, he bein' 'ung, 'avin' 'it his wife over the 'ead with a poker when she weren't lookin', and a buryin' her corpse in a back garden, without even a stone to mark the place, let alone a line from the Psalms and a remuneration of her virtues." "Well, well," said Calton, rather impatiently, as he opened the door for her, "leave us for a short time, there's a good soul. Miss Frettlby and I want to rest, and we will ring for you when we are going." "Thank you, sir," said the lachrymose landlady, "and I 'opes they won't 'ang him, which is such a choky way of dyin', but in life we are in death," she went on, rather incoherently, "as is well known to 'em as diseases, and may be corpsed at any minute, and as—" Here Calton, unable to restrain his impatience any longer, shut the door, and they heard Mrs. Sampson's shrill voice and subdued cracklings die away in the distance. "Now then," he said, "now that we have got rid of that woman and her tongue, where are we to begin?" "The desk," replied Madge, going over to it. "It's the most likely place." "Don't think so," said Calton, shaking his head. "If, as you say, Fitzgerald is a careless man, he would not have troubled to put it there. However, perhaps we'd better look." The desk was very untidy. "Just like Brian," as Madge remarked, "full of paid and unpaid bills, old letters, playbills, ball programmes, and withered flowers." "Reminiscences of former flirtations," said Calton, with a laugh, pointing to those. "I should not wonder," retorted Miss Frettlby, coolly. "Brian always was in love with some one or other, but you know what Lytton says, there are many counterfeits but only one Eros, so I can afford to forget these things." The letter, however, was not to be found in the desk, nor was it in the sitting room. They tried the bedroom, but with no better result. Madge was about to give up the search in despair, when suddenly Calton's eye fell on the waste paper basket, which, by some unaccountable reason, they had overlooked. The basket was half full, in fact more than half, and on looking at it, a sudden thought struck the lawyer. He rang the bell, and presently Mrs. Sampson made her opinion. "How long has that waste paper basket been standing like that?" he asked, pointing to it. "It bein' the only fault I had to find with him," said Mrs. Sampson, "he being that untidy that he never let me clean it out till he told me personally. He said as how he throwed things into it as he might have to look up again, and I haven't touched it for more nor 6 weeks. 'Oping you won't think me a bad housekeeper, it being his own wish, being fond of litter and such like." "6 weeks," repeated Calton, with a look at Madge. "Ah! and he got the letter 4 weeks ago. Depend upon it, we shall find it there." Madge gave a cry, and, falling on her knees, emptied the basket out on the floor, and both she and Calton were soon as busy among the fragments of paper as though they were rag pickers. "'Oping they aren't off their heads," murmured Mrs. Sampson, as she went to the door, "but it looks like it, they bein'—" Suddenly a cry broke from Madge, as she drew out of the mass of paper a half burnt letter, written on thick and creamy looking paper. "At last!" she cried, rising off her knees and smoothing it out. "I knew he had not destroyed it." "Pretty nearly, however," said Calton, as his eyes glanced rapidly over it. It's almost useless as it is. There's no name to it." He took it over to the window, and spread it out upon the table. It was dirty and half burnt, but still it was a clue. There was not much left of it. "There is not much to be gained from that, I'm afraid," said Madge, sadly. "It shows that he had an appointment, but where?" Calton did not answer, but, leaning his head on his hands, stared hard at the paper. At last he jumped up with a cry. "I have it!" he said, in an excited tone. "Look at that paper. See how creamy and white it is, and, above all, look at the printing on the corner. Ott Villa, Toorak." "Then he went down to Toorak? In an hour, and back again? Hardly." "Then it was not written from Toorak?" "No, it was written in one of the Melbourne back slums." "How do you know?" "Look at the girl who brought it," said Calton, quickly. "A disreputable looking woman, one far more likely to come from the back slums than from Toorak. As to the paper, 3 months ago there was a robbery at Toorak, and this is some of the paper that was stolen by the thieves." Madge said nothing, but her sparkling eyes and the nervous trembling of her hands showed her excitement. "I will see a detective this evening," said Calton, exultingly. "Find out where this letter came from, and who wrote it. We'll save him yet," he said, placing the precious letter carefully in his pocket book. "You think you will be able to find the woman who wrote that?" "H'm," said the lawyer, looking thoughtful. "She may be dead, as the letter says she is in a dying condition. However, if I can find the woman who delivered the letter at the club, and waited for Fitzgerald at the corner of Bourke and Russell Street, that will be sufficient. All I want to prove is that he was not in the hansom cab with Whyte." "And do you think you can do that?" "Depends upon this letter," said Calton, tapping his pocket book with his finger. "I'll tell you to morrow." Shortly afterwards they left the house, and when Calton put Madge safely into the St. Kilda train, her heart felt lighter than it had done since Fitzgerald's arrest. CHAPTER XIV. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.